Welcome to Without Boundaries, a podcast from Russell Investments. We're here to talk with the people behind the portfolios, the active managers from all asset classes who shape how markets move in the real world, and who help us improve financial security for investors around the globe. I'm your host, Jon Eggins, Head of Portfolio Management here and a Russell Investments lifer of 23 years. We know that the best ideas don't just come from a single source. That's why we look far and wide, spanning markets and asset classes around the globe to find the most compelling managers and insights. Welcome to Without Boundaries, a podcast by Russell Investments. Today I'm joined by Sir Mick Davis, founder and CEO of Vision Blue Resources. Over a storied career in the mining industry, he's built and scaled some of the world's most iconic companies, including Strata and Billiton, and it has a reputation as one of the sector's most influential leaders and thinkers. Your expertise, it spans global energy, commodity markets, as well as the intersection of business and politics. So Mick, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. The way we'd like to start, if it's okay with you, is a couple of icebreakers. And I learned that in your free time, I'm not sure if you still do it, you had been a cricket umpire in the past. Is that
It was years ago. I was. Yeah.
Oh, so I'm an Australian who lives in the US, and I never get to talk about cricket. So I won't belabor it, and you can give me a hard time about the recent results between South Africa and Australia.
I would never do it.
Do you want to tell for our American friends in the audience what's happened lately? Yeah.
Well, Australia and South Africa had a one-day cricket series where Australia got annihilated.
It's a nice way of putting it.
And the South Africa team has now come to the UK. They've just annihilated England. So they seem to be on a roll.
And you won the Test match series.
And we crowned as champions of the world. And you can see I still use we in relation to South Africa when it comes to cricket.
Okay. Is it only on cricket where you...
Well, I have obviously very strong affinity with South Africa. Yeah. But when it comes to the sports teams, my natural inclination is to be backing South Africa.
Okay. Yeah. I've struggled to stay fully in contact, but cricket was a big part of our life growing up in Australia as well. So as part of the icebreakers, do you have a favorite cricket player of all time?
Yeah, I have to say that I do, but because I was a very young person when I started umpiring as a teenager, and I was privileged to be umpiring with Graham Pollock, who was
Graham Pollock,
left-hand batsmen playing cricket, and umpired matches when he played.
Oh wow!
And he was obviously one of the outstanding batsmen, not only of his generation, but of all time.
All time, yeah.
And so, if I had to choose a favorite cricketer, I'm going to choose it.
Can I ask a personal or selfish question? Do you have a favorite Australian cricketer? Do you like any of them?
In terms of favorite, the one who I thought was, and because I watched him from the start of his career, like he played his first test when I first watched him to his retirement, was Glenn McGrath. I thought he was the most extraordinary bowler. Extraordinary bowler. So metronomic in his accuracy.
Back to more your professional life. You started your career as an accountant, and so how did you go from that to ending up in the mining industry?
Well, I guess my career is a career of unrequited ambition. So I started as an accountant. I became a manager in what is then Pete Mike, now KPMG. And I thought I should become a partner, and they said I was too young to become a partner. And so I up to left, and I joined as the head of internal audit at quite a young age. I was in my 20s, of Eskom, which is a very large utility in South Africa, electricity utility in South Africa.
Right.
And 18 months after I got there, the then chief financial officer left the country, emigrated, and for some crazy reason they gave me the job.
And how old were you?
I was 29.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And I knew nothing about being a financial director. Certainly knew nothing about international capital markets or the financing of exceptionally large projects or anything like that. But I got the job, and in that job, I was very exposed clearly to the mining industry, because the mining industry is such an enormous user of electricity, and therefore it's a natural nexus, biggest customers. And so the next step of unrequited ambition was I thought I should be chief executive of Eskom, and the board didn't agree with that. And so I decided to leave, and I was then offered the job by Brian Gilbertson, who is then the chief executive of General Mining.
Got it. Okay.
And that's how I got into the mining industry.
Wow. Okay, so after such a, I guess, storied career in mining, both personally but also professionally, what was it that made you want to, instead of just sitting back and relaxing, what made you want to start a private equity firm, Vision Blue Resources?
I get first of all two reasons. One is I remain intellectually curious, and when you're intellectually curious, the concept of actually stepping back and doing nothing or doing things which don't satisfy the intellectual curiosity is just not within my framework. I had a conviction around two important elements when it came to Vision Blue Resources. One is that the drive to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions and the change in the way that people were living in terms of moving from internal combustion engines to electrical cars for transport, and the inclusion of how buildings were sort of heated and all that stuff like that would require a massive amount of new focused production of what people now call critical minerals. And that would drive a new imbalance in supply and demand. And that secondly, that the supply chain was dominated by China. China had spent the last 25 years securing supply chain from the raw materials to the production of end products, and that the West was in a strategic disadvantage to China, and that would be something which would have to be corrected at some point in time, and the politicians wake up to that. So those two convictions created a possibility for me to be engaged with that. And then, people came to me with opportunities. I liked them. I was joined by an incredibly talented bunch of people who work with me. And so that's specifically resources on the table.
So you kind of alluded to it there, but it'd be great if you could elaborate on what are some of those prior elements from your initial career that have informed how you think about investing in portfolio companies. What do you kind of look for when you're examining a potential opportunity?
I think this is what I'm going to say is obviously relevant to the resource sector and the mining industry, which has a unique set of risks associated with it. So you start off, you can't have a good project unless you've got good rocks in the ground. So you start off looking at portfolio companies who have good rocks in the ground. If they don't have good rocks in the ground, it's a waste of time. Principally, I look for that. Secondly, in the context of what we do now, I was looking for opportunities where there would not have to be significant sort of expenditure on enabling infrastructure. One of the key things that bedevils mining opportunities when you actually start building projects is the fact that you sometimes have a lot of sort of tertiary expenditure you need to do on the side. So building logistics chains, if you need to build a power facility, things like that. So the smaller the footprint initially and the ability to scale up over time once you're up and running was the thing that I was looking for, which meant that we had to be investing in areas where there was an existing logistics system, the power solutions were easily able to be found. So that drove that thinking, and that therefore followed on to, we were investing in sort of low volume, high value commodities rather than high volume, low value commodities to obviate that. And then the final proposition, which was central to the thesis, was that while we were looking for the initial impetus being the upstream solution, which is essentially the minerals that we're digging out of the ground, we wanted to ensure that we could actually transform the projects into being engaged with the midstream, downstream processing as well. Because if you didn't do that, one single element of the value chain, and because as I said earlier, China controls the value chain in many of these commodities, they could then start fiddling around with different elements of the value chain, disadvantage you while gaining the advantage back in other elements of the value chain. So it was those three principal considerations that we think about when we look at the investments in your portfolio companies.
And I think we'll continue talking about this, but you talked about this sort of intersection between the mining industry and the energy transition as a big theme. With that in mind, and you shared a little bit of like what you're looking for in a company, are there specific market segments, specific metals and minerals that are especially interesting, attractive, important in your mind right now?
So we focus in on what is going to be relevant for the biggest component of this dramatic change, which is one is at the issue of energy generation, because what was essentially was happening is that we were having this dramatic change to the primary energy mix into any electricity systems, where previously it had been fossil fuel and to a certain extent nuclear. It was now going to become essentially dominated by the renewables. As renewables came in, they were creating instability within the system because the sun doesn't shine all the time, the wind doesn't blow all the time either, and so you have an inherent instability in the system, which can only be resolved by having a base load type power behind that. Now, that base load power could either come from a fossil fuel, coal generated power station, oil, but that sort of defeats the objective. You could have nuclear, but nuclear still today does not have a political mandate to proceed with it. And so we looked at the fact that you maybe would need very large-scale battery storage. So that was the one thing. The other thing was that recognizing that the major change was going to be electric vehicles, either hybrids or pure electric vehicles, and that would require a significant amount of input to commodities which in the past had other industrial type solutions, but we're now having a very focused solution. So copper, for instance, there's 4 times more copper in an electric car than there's in the standard internal combustion engine powered car. Cobalt, nickel, lithium for the cathode of the battery, graphite for the anode. So we looked for those sorts of commodities and projects in those commodities where we could actually make an impact.
You talked a little bit about, I guess, a strategic shortage in many of these critical minerals and metals. How do you sort of scope and scale what the size of that opportunity or the size of that shortage really is?
Well, you do it based on projections. So, I mean, you make a set of assumptions. First of all, there's an inherent industrial usage of many of these things. I mean, so that you factor into, and that would be determined by your assessment of economic growth rates. Are there any discontinuities that are going to take place, like the industrialization of a major populous country in the making? You look at that. You look at the whole question of different sets of assumptions about what is the level of electrification that is going to take place, what is the level of renewable energy, and what do you need to happen to go with greenhouse gas emissions, and that drives a demand profile, and we know exactly what projects are out there, so you can actually see the structural shortages materialize over time. But the other thing which I need to mention is that we were very focusing on what I mentioned earlier, being the strategic deficit to China, because it's one thing being able to find projects around the world. You have to get mining companies to want to exploit them, and they will only exploit them if they are viable and provide a proper risk-based return. If we are in an environment where they're competing against China, whose companies have a different view on the cost of capital. To most these national mining companies, it's very difficult to capture those. So our thinking is that not only was there a profound demand requirement to meet this, the implications of greenhouse gas emission reduction, but there was a strategic requirement which was going to have to be met as well. And that drove us again into the types of commodities we decided to go into. So going into rare earths was a strategic decision. Going into graphite was a strategic decision because of these components.
As I understand it, you're quite active in the companies that you end up investing in as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you engage with those companies? You gave a good example. You can't change the rocks, you can change the management team. So what type of active activity do you do with the companies that you end up putting in the portfolio?
So I have to say to you that I've been used to running a company and have people directly reporting to me, and although I am I'm very orientated to distributed management in terms of I really do have a delegation.
Yeah.
But I was still in charge, and I could say, click my fingers and I said, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this. When you invest as a shareholder, as a portfolio investor, you have an entirely different dynamic. First, we have a management team which is very eager to protect their own status of independence.
Yep.
At the same time, benefiting from having you as a shareholder. And secondly, you are not as engaged operationally as you would be when you're running an integrated mining company. So it took us time to learn how we could actually influence and impact how these companies were. So our first view was to make sure that the management teams had the skill sets that were needed to actually perform. So a lot of our interventions were making sure that the people who are running the companies basically could do the job that they were doing. We couldn't helicopter people in, but we could actually, strongly influence that. We also took positions on their board, so we could actually, be engaged with them from board level. And then with all our companies, we set up, I call them technical committees, where we sit down with them and they engage with us in terms of the journey that they're traveling, and so we can actually input into that and demonstrate that we are there to actually add value to their propositions. And if they can see that we have quality people who've had years of experience, whether it's managerial experience, financial experience, technical experience, they basically, over time, because everybody's rational, will come to you to want to tap into that level of expertise. And that's essentially how we do it. But it's a learned, for me, it's been a learned skill.
Right. This was a new thing you developed. Well, yeah.
Because you have to approach it in an entirely different way.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. I definitely wanted to get to that, how you think about adding value to companies, but jumping back, if it's okay, to the regulatory framework, you talked about how things were gradually getting better. I was wondering if you could talk about what are some of the specific policy or regulatory things you feel like Western governments needed to do, and how far are we from getting where we need to be, to sort of ratchet down that.
Then the burden of regulation, which has been imposed on the industry over many years, brings about with it its very, very significant cost. And it's a regulation which spans way beyond, environmental issues and regulatory issues in relation to how you get your mining license, things like that. And so the extent of what mining companies need to do today to maintain their license to operate is huge, and the disproportionate cost is not able to be recovered because you can't simply pass that cost on to the consumer because your price is determined by market mechanisms. So you don't have the capacity to do that. And so the economics of therefore investing in challenging projects has been undermined. And then the other thing that we now need to bring back, which is now the investors, that the people who've remained invested in the mining industry, because of the nature of cyclicality and because they have other options that they want to exploit, is they have turned the mining industry into cash cows, cash producers. So they have disincentivized boards and management teams from enhancing the NPV of the companies to actually producing cash. So they have disincentivized them from going out and doing further research as to where they can find decent projects. They've disincentivized them from building new projects. They're disincentivized them from extending the lives of the existing operations. And so the amount of capital expenditure that the mining industry invests today in new expansion is down very, very significantly. And so that reduction in capital expenditure means that mining companies basically don't have the wherewithal to exploit significant new opportunities around the world. Now, that all has to change. Yes. And that can only change through, I think, today, government incentivization. So if governments want mining companies to exploit projects which deliver materials and resources which they need, then to do something about lowering the cost of capital. They can do that by government agencies providing long-term, lower cost debt facilities, which is very significant. They themselves could make investments. They could actually provide tax incentives to institutions to invest in resource companies. But something has to happen because the market itself is not going to self-correct.
Vast enough, I guess, that what makes you think now is a good time to be an investor in the types of minerals, metals that you're focused on?
Well, because I come back to my conviction around electrification and the strategic deficit, that the demand for these commodities in the West is going to burgeon. And there are few players who can actually access that at the moment. The major players in the mining industry, because of the reasons I've given, are not capable of doing it. And also because the nature of these projects, although the markets are potentially huge, the initial projects are relatively small. And so for them to actually invest in them doesn't really impact their bottom line 100%. So there's
an opportunity and inefficiency there.
Exactly, for me and others like me to exploit. And I have this conviction that although it's been a challenging last couple of years, that thesis remains whole. And that has now been supplemented by the direction of travel taken in particular by the United States.
Got it.
And in seeing that it is in their strategic interest to secure across the chain, sources of supply of raw materials, of downstream processing and stuff like that. So they are now putting themselves in a position where they're providing funding and financing opportunities which are lowering our cost of capital and allowing us to access these opportunities. And so I think that for me, because I'm an investor, I invest in my own fund.
Yes.
I think this is a great opportunity to create value, because I think what we're investing is fundamentally valuable, and that ultimately the market is going to recognize that.
So we're still trying this out, mate. So, but it's been fun actually with some of the other folks. So we're going to do a thing that we call the risk game, where I'll lay out a series of scenarios, and there's two answers. One answer is take a chance, and the other answer is play it safe. And we'll just go through one by one. And so the first one, which I had to explain to some of my colleagues here what this meant, is when it's late in the day, do you approve of using a night watchman in cricket?
Play it safe.
Play it safe. Does that actually mean to use one?
Yes.
Yes. There we go. Play it safe. If you're another cricket one, would you ever do a reverse sweep?
Take a chance.
Take a chance. I'm not going to ask you to explain what that is. I think I'm going to ask people to look at Google like Ricky Ponting doing that or something like that. The next one, read a biography from someone with a vastly different worldview.
Take a chance.
Take a chance. Investing in an upstart copper mine in Peru.
Play it safe.
Play it safe. Does it depend on whether the rocks are any good?
A lot depends on the rocks. A lot depends on the country at the moment. Right now, investing in Peru is...
Play it safe.
Yeah.
Got it. Hiring a public utilities professional to join a mining company.
Take a chance.
And then finally, enjoying a brine with no barbecue sauce.
Take a chance.
Take a chance. Well, thanks again, Mick. We talked in the beginning about we want legendary investors joining us. We want interesting asset classes that people don't know that much about or potentially underallocated to. And we want to make sure people get a chance to see what investment opportunities they get access to when they work through us with Russell Investments. So thank you so much for joining us and for hitting all three of those marks, and appreciate your time.
It was good to be here. It was fun. Thank you.
Well, mate, that's our show for today. Remember, in your personal life and your investing life, keep breaking boundaries.
This
podcast is intended for informational purposes only. The content provided within the podcast should not be construed as investment advice, research, or a recommendation, solicitation, or offer for any specific Russell investment or other product, strategy, security, or service. The information does not take into account the investment objectives or circumstances of any particular investor and may not be appropriate for all investors. All investments carry a level of risk and do not typically grow at an even rate of return and could experience negative growth. Any past performance results should not be seen as a guide to future returns. All opinions presented are as of the date of the recording and subject to change without notice. Information contained within the podcast is obtained from sources believed to be reliable but not guaranteed. Reliance upon the information provided in the podcast is at the sole discretion of the listener. The general information contained in this publication should not be acted upon without obtaining investment advice from a licensed professional. This podcast may involve discussions with non-Russell Investments personnel. The views and opinions expressed by non-affiliated personnel in this podcast are those of the speakers and do not reflect the policy or position of Russell Investments or its affiliates. This content should not be construed as a recommendation or endorsements of any third-party manager featured on the podcast. Some of the portfolio managers or firms featured in this podcast may manage funds or accounts that are offered by Russell Investments, and they may have business relationships with Russell Investments or its affiliates. Neither Russell Investments nor any of its staff accepts any responsibility for or liability with respect to the information or opinions contained in this publication. Any of this content is suitable for professional clients only. Capital at risk. Copyright 1995 to 2025 Russell Investments Group LLC, all rights reserved.